To me, a person with a big ego isn't just someone who's arrogant or like the most arrogant one in the room. I think it's just someone whose internal image of themselves needs constant maintenance. And these are most of the time the people who spend the most energy on maintenance as well because they have such a big ego. And it's also the same people who always need to be, like, for example, the smartest one in the room, the most intelligent one, the most successful one, the most caring one, the prettiest one. And even sometimes the most desperate ones and the most misunderstood in some cases. I think sometimes they also tend to take criticism not as information, not as other people's opinion, but as a direct attack on their identity. And this is something we're going to talk about later on in the video, but it's just something I wanted to mention beforehand, since now I also want to talk about people with smaller ego. I feel like this is very forgotten. When we talk about egos, people are just focusing on the big ego, but we just forget about like the in-betweens and everything else that comes with it. And I think it's also pretty important to address small egos. Basically, people with small egos, I don't think they're necessarily like weak or vulnerable in some way. I think it can be a pretty good thing, because I've seen people with small egos be more open in general to like new experiences and stuff. Since their ego is smaller, they don't necessarily need like to constantly protect it. Like, they don't need to protect it at all costs, you know what I mean? So they also spend less energy worrying about like how others perceive them and how they appear in certain settings. And I think one thing that they all have in common is they can say they were wrong without thinking too much about it. They can ask like stupid questions, or questions that other people would think are stupid, because they don't need to worry about like their appearance all the time. And this ties back also to just performativeness in our society. They can also admire someone without like feeling like they're glazing them, or without feeling inferior in some way. But I think the important question to ask is, does a small ego make you freer, or does it make you more vulnerable? Because I think if your ego is taken too far, especially in the small direction, it can be overly accommodating to other people. You can have weak boundaries, and you can stop defending your identity completely, and that can be absolutely crushing. One thing I really want to talk about is ego death. This is the process when someone goes from having a very big ego, realizing it, and then becoming more grounded and being more careful about it. And essentially, they just dim down their ego because they realized at what point it was really big. I think that also brings the question of what happens to you when your identity, or like the identity you thought you did, or the identity that you built, suddenly comes collapsing. Like, at first, obviously, you're going to feel horrible, because like it's like the person you thought you were got contradicted by reality in some way. But I feel like at some point you realize that embarrassment doesn't kill you, rejection doesn't like diminish your value, and that just like caring more doesn't make you inferior. I think after the ego death, ego is something that you can notice and control better. Like, you can notice it in the way that when you're making decisions, you can ask yourself if it's your ego speaking, or it's that you actually don't want it. I think the process is also very different for person to person. For me personally, it was like just self-realization. I was just every week, actually, I have like a debrief call with my best friend, and we just talk about like our week and how it was in general, like things that we liked and we did not like. And another thing that we actually do is we tell each other our green and red flags. And I think this type of activity, when done regularly, can just keep you more grounded in general, and you're more aware of the person that you are. And when she was telling me my red flags and my green flags, I felt as if it didn't really like correspond to the person I thought I was. So then I started making small adjustments, and that's when I realized that it was all in my head. Like, I was being extremely performative to a crowd that wasn't even there. And ego death isn't something you can force on someone. It's not because you tell them that they have a big ego that they're going to change. It really has to come from them themselves. Every single case of change is like that. You can never force someone to change. You can only give them hints. You can only help them if they themselves want to. And as I said earlier, ego actually made me perform for a crowd that wasn't even there. And I'm pretty sure it's the same case for a lot of people out here. which is why there's so many people who are very performative, and which is why our society is very performative. And I think this is kind of sad because the crowd isn't even there, and when we're performing, sometimes it also comes out of habit. So we're performing even nobody is watching. So essentially, we're just wasting a ton of time and a lot of energy trying to maintain an image of yourself that isn't even genuine. Just think about all the opportunities you missed because of ego. Think of all the times you didn't apply to something because you were scared of being rejected, or like when you didn't ask a question because you didn't want to ask a dumb question seen by others, but then you never actually ended up understanding the topic. Think about all the times that you actually admired someone but never complimented them or never like talked to them because you didn't want to be seen as like vulnerable, or like you didn't want to be seen like you're glazing them. All these decisions are just based on how you want to be perceived and not what you actually want. So these decisions are basically decisions that your ego made for you, and they're not coming from you. And as I said earlier, someone with a big ego isn't someone who's like walking down the hall screaming like, "Oh, I'm better than you at everything." I think it's just someone who's constantly calculating their social position. Questions that they might ask themselves is like, "Oh, do I care too much? How did I seem? Like, do I look very vulnerable?" And it's as if they're watching their lives come off from the third perspective. They're experiencing their image instead of actually experiencing their life. I also want to talk about the unspoken competition and love right now because of ego. Right now I feel like it's whoever cares less wins. And I feel like this is also something we see a lot in like social media in general, because people tend to suppress their emotions and they don't necessarily like do everything according to how they feel necessarily. I feel like nowadays a lot of people are willing to watch a relationship or a potential relationship completely disappear. Just because I want to be your partner feels like you're giving the other person power in some way. I think that's kind of sad because if you had a great talking stage with a person and you knew that you might potentially want to date this person, and you're stopping yourself to talk to them or like to hang out, go on a date because of your ego, I think it's just an opportunity that was there, but you missed it, like consciously. Like, it's a decision that you made. It's not by accident. I feel like in these situations, it's more like your ego would rather lose the person than lose the upper hand. And in all the scenarios I mentioned, it's not is ego bad. I feel like it's more about how many choices that you made were actually yours and not because of your ego.